All right. So I'd like to start just talking a little bit about what you do professionally. First, can you just talk about your experience in the architecture in Lima?
Well, I'm an architect. I design buildings, I design homes, and I also do urban planning and urban design. And in my office, I have a partner, and we do contests also. So we've won a few last year. And I also teach. I teach urbanism and design at the University of Lima. So that's about what I do in the daytime.
Yeah. What would you say makes working at an architect in Lima different from working an architect in, say, the US or in Shanghai?
Well, I think in Peru there's less architectural culture. I think in other countries they value the architect a little bit more than in my country. That's on one side. And on the other hand, we have a country and cities that have a lot of problems that have to be solved. Like a lot of people who don't have running water, or the conditions of living of a lot of people are not so good in urban environments. So our discipline kind of looks towards those problems and try to fix some of them, which is very difficult because we're a country with a developing country. So I think design, as other countries value it, is not really taken into account in Peru yet. Like good urban design changes people's lives. That sort of understanding has not yet been understood for example, for politicians or people who make the decisions of our cities.
And how do you go about tackling that? How do you go about implementing good design while still, adhering to the conditions of the cities?
Well, I worked a lot of years. I had a firm before I worked at the City Hall of Lima. And working at my office, I felt like I needed to work in another environment where people were making those decisions. Because as an architect in the private sector, I didn't feel like I was making much of a difference. So I went to the City Hall of Lima, and we started planning the whole city like a year and a half, which was a very, very hard task. A lot of problems understanding our city, and actually then I moved to the Ministry of Environment to work on an urban project with politicians and people in that area, and found out that actually it's the same thing. I mean, the private sector and the public sector, you can only do so much in each one, and it's up to you finally where you want to get results. So I've been in both sides, like the public and the private sector, and I think in both you can do and make changes. But now I work with clients, and I work for the public sector as a private consultant, and I work for the private sector also as an architect and an urban thinker. So I found a place there that it's not inside the public sector and not only in the private sector. I'm like an intersection of both. And I found that that's my place to be. Right. And that's where I can make the most of what I do.
That's awesome. Thinking about intersections, so during the day you're an architect, and at night you have a drawing project.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, I draw at night because it's a project that I don't live, I don't make revenue from the project, so I have to do it in my spare time, which is strange because it's really a project that I love, and I would be doing it every day, every hour if I could, but I can't. So in the daytime I work but that work as an architect also feeds my imagination for the illustration. So I think I could not do only one of those things. I am all of those things together, and those things together create these illustrations at night. So I put my kids to sleep, and I don't illustrate every day. It's impossible. I have to sleep sometimes. So I try to, when I feel very much inspired, that's when I draw, and I take the time to make the city. But actually, I think about the city a lot in the daytime. I mean, the thinking process and the sketching process is continuous for wherever I can go, or if I have time. And the process of making the illustration is actually when it's at nighttime, or in the weekends when I have, when my husband is kind enough to take my kids to the park and give me some silence to work. But there's a different, I think about them a long time and through the daytime, but I execute the city, like really work on it at night. So it's like the mechanical process takes place in the nighttime.
So your project is taking the 55 cities from Calvino's book, Invisible Cities, and drawing them out, illustrating them, really putting a visual link into the stories. How do you think your experience in architecture plays into your sort of visualization of these cities?
I think a lot. Well, my profession, I learned to draw as an architect. I do not draw like an artist. I draw with lines and with fine pens, and my method of drawing is with lines, which is a very architecture type of drawing. So in that sense, I think my profession has been really, really profoundly important to the way, or the how I draw. But the inspiration for my illustrations does not come from architects or architecture as a discipline. It comes from my daily experiences in the city. The city is a theme, or the concepts of cities, what makes cities, who live in cities, how cities are formed. I love to research cities as places. And I'm a daughter of a diplomat, so I've lived in a lot of cities. I've lived in Helsinki, and I've lived in Caracas, Guatemala City, but really think a lot. I mean, a lot of the process is thinking. And it's not easy, because sometimes I have no ideas, because it doesn't yet, I don't understand the words yet. And then in a moment, maybe 2 months or 3 months or a week, it doesn't matter, something appears and makes sense, and then I just begin to draw in my living room. I have a table, and there's all my stuff, my coffee, or sometimes a glass of wine, it depends on my mood, and music. And then I just start doing, and it takes me from there. I don't control the process entirely. I think the process controls a little bit of me.
That's awesome. When you are working on pieces like this, I think it's so interesting that you're basing it off of, you know, another artist, or in this case a writer. Do you find yourself, when you're reading it, really feeling in conversation with Calvino as opposed to reading him? And what are the ways that you translate his words, which are obviously not those of an architect, to one of an architect and one also of a illustrator?
I do feel, sometimes I joke around with this movie, Sixth Sense, that the kid says, I see dead people. I sometimes kid around saying that actually Calvino talks to me, but it's not like he's talking to me. Like when I read his words, I completely connect with him. I think he's an absolutely fantastic author. I love, it gives me pleasure to read his words. So I think that connection is what I think is Calvino's talking to me. And when I read the words, I actually imagine, it's like when you open up a Coca-Cola, like a I read the city, and I just start, something goes working in my mind, and it just happens. And I haven't felt like that with any other author that I have read. Actually, with not so much books of Calvino himself, but with this book is a very, very direct connection. And also as a person, I like listening to, there's videos of Calvino talking. He lived in Paris for a long time. He didn't live in Italy. And he loved cities. I mean, all his work has to do with cities. If you read his novels, it's always he describes the scenery where the novel is taking place. He actually wrote a novel about the 4 seasons in a city and a person who feels these seasons change. So I think he's a very urban author, and that's where I connect with him, his love of and passion of cities. And in the video, when they interview him in 1970-something, he walks around Paris with the interviewer, with the journalist, and he's like talking about the city and what he likes about Paris. And then he stops at a street, and there's a lot of stores that sell cheese. And he's like, this store, for example, when you walk around the city, if I had to write a book about cheese, I would come to the street and talk to the vendors and smell the cheese and try different types of cheese. And just being here would be an input for my novel. So his experience, he really experienced the city, and that's what he translates into his novels, and that's what I kind of read between the lines when he talks about these travelers that arrive at night or in the morning, which is different. Arriving to Shanghai, it's very different in the morning than at night. We were leaving NYU Shanghai yesterday, and it was all lit up, and it was a different Shanghai than in the morning, totally different. So that's how I.
And then now, what's it like working with a classic? You know, something that not only when it was written has such obviously an impact, but also now has generated sort of a cultural memory for itself. Do you get fans of the book, people really looking at your work and identifying with the book? What sort of reactions do you get?
I get a lot of reactions. It's a project that I've been working on for 4 years. The first year, I did not show the project to anyone, just my closest friends or in my family, maybe, not even. It was like mine, my own, and for fun, and well, not for fun, but for my son. I have a close relationship with my son, and I was illustrating the book for him so he could understand what I was talking about. And it was a very personal project. And then people started asking me to go online with the illustrations, to share them, and I started doing that. And then it did go a little bit viral the second year. I have people who write to me from all over the world saying that they love the project. And a few people have written me like, why are you doing this? You ruin my experience because it's invisible cities. What don't you understand about invisible? Like that. And I'm like, well, if you don't want to see the illustrations, you're welcome to not looking at them. And actually, I don't look at other illustrations of the book. I mean, I don't research the city of Diomira online and take, no. I have forbidden myself to look at other illustrators or artists who are illustrating the book, just to not contaminate my view of the book. And then I read one at a time, so in the order of the book. So I've had people who write to me with really enthusiasm and say, you have to finish the project, which is nice, so I can finish it someday. I have 34 to go, so it's a lot of work, but I think 90% of the people who have written me have been positive reaction to the project and to the whole process and everything, so yeah.
What would you tell yourself now as a young student who maybe wants to get involved in creative work but doesn't exactly know how to get involved or to begin doing things like you're doing or any other sort of creative work? What sort of advice would you have for them?
Well, first of all, don't take creative process so seriously. I think I began this project because I started playing with my inner self, like my childish self, and actually not afraid to make mistakes, because with the internet and a lot of people are entitled to critique other people's work, and I think if you actually are genuine and have you feel like doing things, just do them. Don't listen to other people. That's a very important part of being able to create, because if not, you're thinking about other stuff, and it contaminates your view. And second of all, I spent a lot of time looking for a project. I didn't know what. I didn't know where. I didn't know how. But when I decided to make the illustrations of this book as a project that had an ending and had an objective to get there, to finish the book, somehow the blank paper started to feel less, how do you say, intense when you don't know how to start. Because I have an objective, I have like a long view, and it takes away the anguish of the piece itself. So having a project is something that is really important, and I think that could. I was talking to a student yesterday that he loved to draw stuff, but he didn't know what. So I said, just imagine a project for yourself. Say, I'm going to illustrate one city a month for a year, and you have an objective, 12 cities in a year, and I have to get there. So it kind of takes away your fear or your mind about the blank paper. So that I could recommend that for the students. So have an objective and start working towards it.